the conventional approach isn't looking deeper at why these kids are having these symptoms in the first place.
Welcome to Talking About Kids. I am your host, R. Bradley Snyder, researcher, activist, and author of The 5 Simple Truths of Raising Kids. Piper Gibson is a doctor of functional medicine, the founder of the Tic Disorder Institute, and the author of Tic Talk, Common Misconceptions, Natural Approaches, and Real Conversations about Tic Disorders. Piper is on a mission to counter the narrative that we should ignore kids' motor or vocal tics and just hope that they grow out of them. Instead, as she and I discuss, Piper argues, and by the way, has the research to back it up, that the experiences of kids with tics can be vastly improved by addressing how they are affected by biological factors, environmental conditions, emotions, and physical fitness. Talking About Kids is sponsored in part by the Arizona Department of Health Services Must Stop Bullying campaign through its Title V Maternal and Child Health Program. For more information, go to muststopbullying.org. If the information in this episode changed how you think about kids with tics for the better, well, it might do the same for a friend or colleague. Please like it and share it. And now, the interview.
My son was diagnosed with a transient neurological tic disorder 14 years ago. So just so parents understand the difference between a tic disorder and Tourette's is tic disorders are the precursor to Tourette's. It involves motor and vocal tics. So meaning they're either doing a movement, a lot of times it starts with eye blinking or clapping their hands, or making a noise, clearing their throat, saying a word repetitively. If that child does that for more than a year and they're doing it consistently with a motor and a vocal tic, then they get a Tourette's diagnosis. So my son was diagnosed with a transient neurological tic over 14 years ago. And the general consensus when it comes to tic disorders is most of us are told, just ignore it. They'll grow out of it. But we feel hopeless. There's no answers. These kids just continue to struggle. They can't control their body movements. We had a neurologist tell us my son just needed a good spanking at one point. And that was really the catalyst for me to go back to school because I felt like the conventional approach to tic disorders and Tourette's just was not helping us. And so I went back to school to relearn everything I thought I knew about health and wellness. And my passion for working with families who have tic disorders was born because I saw how many other families were struggling after we worked so hard to get results.
Thank you for that definition of Tourette's syndrome. How common is it?
It's pretty common. It's estimated that about 1 in 80 children has a tic disorder, but when we look at it, we think it is grossly underdiagnosed, meaning, you have a kid who's blinking their eyes constantly, and a lot of times we're like, oh, it's just allergies, take some Zyrtec, instead of really looking at, where is that eye blinking coming from? So we do think it is misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed.
And I know that you address this in your book, Tic Talk, Common Misconceptions, Natural Approaches, and Real Conversations about Tic Disorders. But if it is the case, and again, when you access kind of popular information or literature about Tourette's, something that you said comes out pretty clearly. This is something that a lot of kids, fortunately, grow out of. There's kind of an arc to its development and its recession, right? But in the middle of that, we have real kids potentially facing real adversities because of this. So can you explain a little bit about what are some of the risks that kids face when this is left unaddressed?
Yeah, I feel like when we look at it from the perspective of, a lot of people say tics and Tourette's, they wax and wane, the symptoms come and go. But the window that I look at it from is, one, a lot of people really don't grow out of it. Some people just get that tic disorder diagnosis. Later on, they get a Tourette's diagnosis and they're like, well, there's really not much you can do for Tourette's. Just
Okay.
ignore it. Or we'll give you some medications that are just going to maybe reduce symptoms, but not more than like 50%. So when I look at it from that window of just ignore it, you're doing your child a disservice. So if your check engine light in your car comes on, you don't drive around for months just ignoring it. At some
Mm.
point, you're going to take that car to the mechanic. They're going to hook it up to diagnostics and they're going to tell you what's wrong with with your car. But when it comes to our kids, we're really written off when it comes to tics and Tourette's is, oh, there's nothing you can do about it. Just ignore it. Maybe they'll grow out of it. And so we're really doing a disservice when we look at the actual current evidence and studies that are out there that are really pointing to dysregulated immune systems, nutritional deficiencies, inflammation, all
Mm.
of these things. So if you have a kid who has a tic disorder that's being driven by some underlying factor, an allergy, leaky gut, a parasite, heavy metals, mycotoxins, whatever the case may be, and we're just like, just ignore it, that continues to fester in their body and drive the symptoms. So, for me, it's really detrimental because the conventional approach isn't looking deeper at why these kids are having these symptoms in the first place.
I think here I want to maybe take a step back because you are a doctor of functional medicine.
Mhm.
And functional medicine has, and you just started to explain a little bit about the functional medicine approach. But for listeners who aren't familiar with that designation, functional medicine, can you kind of define it for everyone?
Yeah, functional medicine is about digging deeper. We are not looking at how to give a diagnosis, where typical lab work would say, hey, you have these issues in your blood work, we're going to give you this diagnosis. Whereas functional, we're looking at lab work to dig deeper, figure out what the body is doing, what's the function in the body, how to return the function to the body, but also overall how all of those body systems are connected. Your immune system, your digestive system, your nervous system, how are they all connected? And so we're really looking at returning function to the body, but how they're all connected and impacting each other in the first place.
Yeah, and when I've read about functional medicine, uh, one of the things that I like about it, and longtime listeners of the Talking About Kids podcast know that we're all about upstream here.
Mhm.
If we can move things upstream, and that's what I see in functional medicine. You're not addressing the symptoms; you are looking at the root causes and how very complicated our bodies are. Okay, I wanted to talk about that because
Absolutely.
here we go. We're gonna bring it back around here,
Okay.
Piper. It in your research, in your writing, you point out that even though this is a neurological disorder,
Mhm.
that the kids can't control this, and we need to make this very, very clear, right? We cannot blame kids who have this on their tics or on their vocalizations, right?
Right. It's not their fault. It is absolutely uncontrollable. It is an urge. It's like they feel they have to do it and
Right.
their body will just naturally do it.
That being said, that caveat, and we may have to keep coming back to it,
Okay.
but there are conditions that predict these vocal and physical tics. Am I right?
Conditions, you mean like,
Well, I mean, you point out in your work, sometimes you can they are response to stress or other
yes,
adversities or transitions
I see
or
what you're saying.
the new right. So and again, this looks a little bit like trauma sensitivity in that sense, in that it is something that happens to a body, but we can create environments that make responses less likely or less severe. And if I'm reading your work correctly, it's also the case that we can, without blaming the kid, we can create environments where their texts are less severe and less likely to occur.
Yes, absolutely. So, when we are looking at tics and Tourette's, my whole passion is that tic disorders are not purely neurological. There are some
Right.
underlying drivers that are turning on that immune response, whether it is a food sensitivity or a gut pathogen or a biotoxin like mold being present in a home.
Mm.
Looking at, nutrient deficiencies. What do their diets look like? So with these kids, their immune systems get turned up and they just get stuck in this state of, you learn it in high school
Yeah.
biology, middle school biology, fight or flight, but they get stuck in this mode where their immune system is turned on. Everything that they are exposed to impacts these symptoms. So
Yeah.
if we start to remove these stressors from their bodies, like if it's mold and we remediate our home, we've pulled out a huge stressor from their bodies. So our goal is to figure out what are those things that are triggering their symptoms and how do we remove them and get their immune system back on track.
Interesting. And so it's really an interaction. It's an interaction of their biology and their environment. And if you can do the right studies and tests, you can sometimes come up with blueprints for, again, lessening or reducing the episodes.
Absolutely. And that's why we incorporate the functional lab testing. It's an
Mm.
investigation tool. We're using it to investigate in the body what is causing these issues. And I will tell you, it is not just one. These kids live in the perfect storm of body burden. They have so many things that are impacting their bodies and their immune system that it just comes to a head. And boom, their check engine light comes on. We see these outward symptoms, vocal and motor.
Right. I saw, and again, you're the founder of Elite Gene Labs, and I'd like you to
Correct.
talk to me about that a little bit because sometimes, and this is an issue I raised around adverse childhood experiences when I was talking with Nadine Burke Harris about it.
Mhm.
When we talk about genes, some people get worried that we're talking about biological predeterminism, that, oh, we're sentencing this kid to this path. So what's the right way to think about accessing genetic information to benefit the kid and to not condemn them, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, absolutely. Genetics is one of my biggest passions. And when I speak to parents, I try to do it in very plain language. And I explain to them when I'm looking at their genes, these are not, oh my gosh, I'm going to die genes. We are not looking at, predisposition to breast cancer, colon cancer. We are looking at the interaction between your genes, your diet, your lifestyle, and your environment, and how they
Mm.
all impact each other. So really for me, one of the cool things about Tourette's is that although the studies say there is a genetic component, they do not know if it's one gene or multiple genes. And the thought right now is that it is multiple genes that contribute to this.
Okay.
But when we look at genetics, we know from the epigenetic standpoint that your environment impacts the way that your genes function. So,
Right.
again, if we can remove these things from their environment, their genetics start to function better and we start to see a reduced symptom load,
Hmm.
basically. So, we are using genetics in our practice as a roadmap, it is a guide. We are not saying you are predetermined to, this life of
Right.
misery. It's no, you have these genes. And the super cool thing about your genes is that we can alter your environment to make you feel better and live a healthier, more
Hmm.
optimal life.
In your experience, what are some of the environmental stressors, the diet factors, that the lifestyle choices that really do exacerbate Tourette's?
Yeah. There are a couple of really good studies on gluten, dairy, and sugar
Okay.
being very inflammatory
Mm.
and contributing to those symptoms. And I will say diet is one piece of the puzzle. It is not the big piece of the puzzle. I mean, we took out foods at the beginning of our journey. And yes, it made some changes, but it didn't make the most significant impact. It was really a collection of what we are doing. So one, foods like gluten, dairy, sugar, very impactful. Underlying infections, strep infections that get out of control or go, unnoticed,
Mm.
untested, um, biotoxins, so people living in moldy homes, really impactful. We've seen kids with one parasite. We've seen kids with multiple parasites. We see kids with tons of environmental toxins. I see a lot less heavy metals. Heavy metals is a big topic on the internet, but really when we test, I don't see a ton in the kids we're working with, but a lot of environmental toxins. So for me, my goal is to look at 4 different triggers. We look at biological, so what's going on inside the body. We look at environmental, what are those things, impacting you from outside. We look at mental and emotional. If you are at school and you have a bully in your class, or maybe you're
Hmm.
stressed out about algebra, right? You're going to have some issues. And then we look at physical. So many kids just sit around and exercise their thumbs all day. They're not getting out, being active, moving around, which are things that help
Yeah.
digestion and neurotransmitters and brain health and breathing oxygen. So, I'm looking at these 4 different triggers and where they're coming from and how they impact these kids.
It's so interesting that you mentioned strep because we were fortunate enough to do an episode on pandas
Mhm.
not that long ago. And again, so very, very important to look at, the underlying causes and the different things that can result from one infection, right?
Mhm.
So there's 2 things that I want to make sure that my listeners hear. And the first is, you've been so very good at helping parents in particular explain Tourette's to the teacher, to the workers in the after school program. So I want to talk about that. But then I also want to talk to teachers about things that they can set up in their classroom or in that after school program to make the environment better for
Okay.
these kids. So again, let's start with your advice to parents, because this can be something that's difficult to bring up.
It is. It's difficult because as parents, we feel like we're not given enough information, enough data
Right.
to really understand what's going on with our kids. So many of us are told just ignore it, but not on a deeper level like, why is this happening? What is going on? Who, what,
Right.
when, where, why? We're not getting that. So I always tell parents, one is when it comes to the school, start with education. Just like I explained to you the difference between tics and Tourette's, explain to the provider or your school, your teacher, your principal, your vice principal, whoever's watching your kid after school, explain what tics are, that they're involuntary urges, that suppression isn't really realistic and can
Right.
also be more harmful than helpful. Like a lot of these kids will try to suppress it all day and then they go home and it's just off the charts because their
Yeah.
body has to release all of this urge. Help the teacher to really kind of see what's behind the behavior. So, for your child, is it overwhelmed from sensory input? Because everybody's going to be a little different. Are they tired from trying to suppress it all day? Is there frustration when they're misunderstood? So, you as the parent have the ability to look at your child from the outside and say, okay, what are these things that really I'm seeing impact their tics? And if you're not sure, take create a journal. We have so many free
Mm.
guides, journals on our website, and we can talk about that if you want. But create a journal, write this down because parents can start to see some of those connections so that you can then say, hey, here's a huge connection. So, for example, for me, one of the huge connections we saw is the teachers at the school, the librarian were using Scentsy warmers. There's those scented wax melt warmers
Hmm.
that create a smell because nobody wants to smell sweaty kids all day. But it was a huge trigger for my son. So he'd go to
Mm.
school, he would be triggered by these scents. They would cause his symptoms to be worse. He would have a harder time focusing because his symptoms were so bad throughout the day that by the end of the day, he'd come home red-eyed, frustrated, upset because we had this driver that he was exposed to every single day. So
Right.
kind of keep an eye on that. You can accommodate for simple things like a quiet space to reset,
Hmm.
flexible test taking, sensory support, movement breaks. Movement breaks really could be beneficial for every single person in the
Yeah.
classroom. Jump up, shake it out, move around. Um, you also want to empower your child to teach them self awareness. Like, oh, are my symptoms coming on? Self advocacy to be able to tell people, hey, I have this condition. There's nothing I can do about it. Don't be mean to me. So
Right.
also teaching your kids how to stand up for themselves is a big piece of it. And then frame it as a team effort. So be the advocate for your child, even when you're working with the professionals who do not get it. Like
Hmm.
you are going to be the biggest support system for your kid. And if you're not, and I see this, and this really makes me very sad, because a lot of times we have moms who are like, yes, I see this, we're going to go at it, we're going to do this. But because the dads have a harder time with the data, the information, and really coming to terms with it, it becomes less of a team effort. And so
Hmm.
you have a lot of animosity sometimes in the family between mom and dad, because dad doesn't see it and mom's like, I absolutely see it. So really looking at it from, how can you as a family best support your child that is struggling? It's not you, not about you as dad, it's not about you as mom. This is about your child and how you can better support them. So those are some tips that I give parents on a regular basis about how they can really approach the school and the teachers.
Piper, it is one of the things I've actually talked a lot about on this podcast, and that sometimes parents are the worst. And they're the worst to each other. There is so much pressure put on these individuals. And I've been involved in research that showed that more than the health of their child, more than being a good parent, a lot of parents are more worried about appearing to be a good parent. They are somehow more worried about what the other parents in their peer groups think of their parenting than they actually are about the success of their parenting, which is
Mhm.
crazy, right? So you can understand why some of these things, and it's not just Tourette's, there's so many issues that parents
Right.
have a hard time talking about because they believe that it's a reflection on them. And so we do need to figure out how to help parents get out of their own way and out of each other's way to really benefit their kids. But it's something that comes up a lot.
It's really difficult. And for us, because we look at all the data, we can say to
Yeah.
dads, the mom and the kid in the home are usually sick. Dad, not so much, because he has high levels of testosterone. It's very anti-inflammatory. But it is really disheartening to see this divide in the families, when really your kid needs your support.
Right.
This is what they need. Yeah.
Well, and then I want to go to the second thing that you said, because what we're asking, it sounds like what you're asking, and so I'm going to say I'm asking for it too. What you're asking these teachers and these classrooms to do, to your point, benefit all kids, not just kids with Tourette's, right? And this is, again, this is another theme in talking about kids. When we talk about creating trauma sensitive environments, when we talk about creating environments that are sensitive to other neurodivergencies, these environments work for all kids, not just those kids with Tourette's.
Exactly. And I think that you have one child in your classroom, maybe two in your classroom, that really stand out because
Mm-hmm.
they're different. You have a kid who cannot control their bodily movements. And so, we see that as more of a haphazard thing, a disruption, an interruption to our class. But you know what? Like I said, you stand up, you do a, shake it down break, whatever the case may be. But there's other things that I think are issues within the classroom. Is food as a reward is
Mm,
so detrimental to not just the kid with the tics and the Tourette's or the ADHD child, but also
right.
to everybody in the classroom. And so I really start to encourage parents, talk to your teachers, and some of the things that they're doing is, food is not a reward. Can you give out pencils? Can you give out erasers?
Right.
Can you give out stickers? Can you give out, I don't know, your big prize is a $5, Robot Blocks gift card. Or if you insist on doing the food,
Right.
what kind of cleaner things can you be offering? Because so many of these kids are gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free.
Yeah.
Their teacher's like, oh, here, have this bright red lollipop for your good
Right.
behavior today. And these kids feel left out. So, if I could change one thing, it would really be that the food is reward in the classroom needs to go.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I totally agree. And you also have, vegan kids. You also have kids who come from religious or cultural backgrounds that don't eat certain dishes.
Exactly.
The problem I have with that also, and so I'm going to bring it so maybe you can put your mind to it as well, is, food is so important to cultural identities and to celebrations. It's one of the things that every culture has a celebration that involves some sort of dish. And so it can be a wonderful way to understand different cultures and different impacts and different histories and different perspectives. And it's universal in our gathering and celebration. So it's absolutely something that brings us together in some circumstances. So we just have to figure out how to not have it divide us in other circumstances.
I totally agree with you. And I absolutely see that. And, I really empower parents. So if, the teachers can be more forthcoming,
Yeah.
hey, Sarah Jones's birthday is next week and we are going to have a celebration, then that gives parents like me the time to say, okay, I'm going to make some gluten-free, dairy-free cupcakes and
Right.
I'll make them for the whole classroom,
Right.
whatever the case may be. So, if we can be more forthcoming with those plans and those celebrations, that gives parents like myself the ability to make those changes and those accommodations so that everybody feels included and happy in that celebration.
And then the other piece that was implicit in like how instructions that you give to educators, and this also will apply to people who work in out of school time programs, is that if a kid is feeling stressed, that they are going, if they're feeling anxious, that they're going to more likely have an adverse reaction. And I'm using that term instead of tic because it applies to all neurodivergent kids. It applies to kids who are trauma sensitive. It applies to kids that have emotional regulatory problems, right? So, but to do that, the teacher has to know the kid to know if they're actually exhibiting the signs of adversity, don't they?
They do. And I feel that part of it is, one, a teacher is going to get to know your kid over time. But if
Right,
you know your neurodivergent child very well,
right.
then you can. I had a parent create a guide. It was just
Yeah,
a one-page guide. This is my child. This is
yeah.
what they're dealing with. These are their triggers. This is what we're doing about it. So if you know your child well enough that you can do a one-page report on your child and what they experience from day one, that teacher is going to have a better handle on how to deal with that child.
And this is why when I'm looking at how healthy a school is, if I'm evaluating a school, I'm looking at that practice of greeting each child at the door as they come in. Because it's not just about making that kid feel welcome, but the good educators have learned that they can tell a lot about what kind of day that kid is going to have by how they show up in the morning.
Mhm.
Do they are they as prepared as they looked the day before, or do they look more tired? Right? Is this how they normally greet me, or are they more exuberant, less exuberant? Right? So that daily check in at the door as they're coming on campus, if your faculty can get involved with that, it's in the science. It's in all the evidence-based programs to create, positive, healthy school climates. But this is just another reason why you should be doing that if you're working at a school, right? But the other thing that you mentioned, and again, I'm going to sound, longtime listeners know that I keep coming back to this, but I'm coming back to it because it's a narrative that I feel we have to counter. And there is, in certain school boards across the United States, people have been criticizing social emotional intelligence and mindfulness and saying that they are a different religion, that they are a gateway to beliefs that are counter what parents want their kids to believe. This is, yeah, I'm glad that you're frowning, Piper, but it's a real thing that's going on.
Wow.
So whenever somebody talks about the actual act of being mindful, that is recognizing how your body is responding to a situation, because your body will respond before you have cognitive awareness of it in any way that we think of conscious thought, right? So, and that's the case with Tourette. So you can teach kids to know when their body is reacting to the environment.
You can. So the kids with tics and Tourette's know when they have that urge. That urge comes
Okay.
on. So something like CBIT therapy, which is comprehensive behavioral interventions for tics, teaches what we call competitive movements. So they feel the urge. They're like, oh, I'm
Mm,
going to jerk my neck. We start by teaching them how to move their finger instead. So we're teaching a competitive movement. But really it takes so much mindfulness and awareness that
Mm-hmm.
it can be overwhelming, especially for the little ones. But the older ones, they're trying to focus in class and they're trying to think, but then they're also trying to remember, oh, I'm trying not to jerk my neck, so I'm going to move my fingers. So we have all this noise
Right.
basically going on between how do I control this and how do I be mindful of, when it's coming and going. So this is really for me where all of the testing comes in, because if we can figure out the triggers and we can reduce those triggers, then we have less of this focusing on the tic and more of the focusing on what's going on in the actual classroom. So, I just myself on the mindfulness scale find it incredibly interesting because mindfulness therapy actually has changed my life
Yeah.
as far as how I deal with stress. And it's not a religion and it's not a cult and it's not woo woo. It's
Yeah.
really, yes, I feel this coming on in my body. What am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
So, I think it's really important to teach kids to be able to listen to their bodies. And that's one of the things that I express to parents. You go through this program. By the time you're done, your child will have a gift that lasts a lifetime. And that is that they know how they feel in their own body and what impacts them. They can say, ooh, I ate this
Yeah.
pizza. I feel really bad. I'm not eating it again.
Amazing. Amazing. Earlier when you were talking about how parents can educate teachers about Tourette's and their kids, an easy thing that they could do is bring in a copy of your Tic Talk. So I want to thank you so much for everything you've done in this space. And thank you for being such a wonderful guest on Talking About Kids.
Yes. Thank you, Brad, for having me. It was a great conversation. I loved it. Thank you.
That was Piper Gibson. More information about Piper, the Tic Disorder Institute, and her book is at talkingaboutkids.com. And when you do visit Talking About Kids, please leave me a note. I would love to hear from you. The Talking About Kids theme song is by the Senators. For more of their music, go to thesenatorsmusic.com. And remember, kids are young goats and young humans, and the difference is that young goats are easier to manage.